So I'm Marla Broussard. I'm Professor Emerita of Psychology and Education at Teachers College, Columbia. And I've been working in the field of psychological maltreatment since, I think, 1981, as a researcher, a forensic expert, an advocate, and a trainer. The curriculum that I am presenting today was developed by a number of people involved with the Psychological Maltreatment Alliance. You can find us at thatname.org on the web, and we have a lot of materials that are related to this talk that are posted there, a lot of resources, including additional trainings that you can use. But I'd like to call out here, we have the Fontana Center of New York Foundling, and my colleague Amy Baker is part of that here in the front row. She's presenting later this afternoon. And of course, Mel Schneiderman, who we're all here honoring, and Cyrilla Blackman have all been involved in developing this curricula. My colleague Stuart Hart, who's a professor emeritus at IUPUI in Indiana, and then the American Professional Society on the Abuse of Children, which involves Rosalind Murav and Janet Rosenzweig, are all colleagues that have been involved in developing material for the various presentations that we have, including mine, and there's another one this afternoon you may want to go to. And then an additional one I think that Janet Rosenzweig is developing, along with Leslie and a whole bunch of other people doing presentations. So today what we're going to cover is what is child psychological maltreatment and why is it so harmful, briefly. When does caregiver behavior cross the line from poor parenting into child psychological maltreatment? And how to effectively intervene in the moment when observing poor parenting that might be child psychological maltreatment. And our group has an additional workshop this afternoon that continues that Amy Baker and Rosalind Murav are doing. Okay, so what is child psychological maltreatment? Just to gauge the audience and how quickly I should go through this, are you all quite familiar with the concept or nodding away? Okay, if I go too slowly, I'll move briskly, but if for some reason you have a question, just wave at me and let me know. Okay, so the US, since the beginning of child abuse and neglect laws, has recommended non-sexual, non-physical forms of violence towards children and put mental injury, emotional harm into the original Child Abuse and Prevention and Treatment Act. However, states were left with a responsibility of defining what mental cruelty or emotional harm would be. And as a result, there are various definitions around the country. 3 years ago, Amy and I did a survey of all of the US state statutes, and we found that only a few states actually defined harmful caregiver behaviors. Almost all of it defined it as a child actually being harmed, and some states allowed substantial likelihood of being harmed. So you have to be harmed first, much like tissue damage with physical abuse and neglect. Now, New York law is actually, I would say, not a great law when it comes to psychological abuse and neglect. Neglect is really the only area where clearly you can screen people in for a mental or emotional condition that's been impaired or is imminent danger of being impaired because a parent has not exercised a good deal of care, or in the parent's care, unreasonably a child has been inflicted with harm or a substantial risk thereof. The abuse law really relates primarily to physical injury and emotional harm that results from that. And of course, this might include, depending on how strictly people enforce this, and some of you may be involved with Child Protective Services and much more knowledgeable than I am in terms of the interpretation, but certainly people could be physically injured by attempting suicide as a result of child psychological abuse, developing ulcers, having life-threatening asthma attacks, etc. But it's not, New York does not have a model law on this particular form of abuse and neglect. Yes? Well, the what? Oh, the PowerPoint? Oh, I'm happy to make the slides available. And a lot of them are already available in more detailed form on the Psychological Maltreatment Alliance website. And there's actually an hour-long Psychological Maltreatment 101 with narration and commentary and so forth, if you'd like to take a look at that. Okay, so the definition I'm presenting today is one that was endorsed by the American Professional Society on Child Abuse. And it's a broad definition that focuses in on caregiver behavior. And it is based on a series of exhaustive reviews of the literature, which right now is extremely large. And I get all these alerts when new research comes in, and I get 10 major papers come in every week from around the world. It's no longer just a Western thing to study child abuse and neglect. It's being studied on every populated continent, and a lot of scholars are publishing work. So it's a very large, universal, international, high-quality literature. Some of the studies are genetically informed. And the definition that we've developed describes all of the things that are non-physical, non-sexual, caregiver harms to children, or behaviors that are related to caregiver harms for children. There are some other major definitions, like the National Incidence Study. The military developed the FAIR system. Some of you are at NYU. Amy Slepp is a professor there that was involved with developing that and rolling it out with the military. There's a tremendous amount of overlap in these definitions. Okay, so we identified and did some research classifying the different subtypes, but there are 6 main subtypes of psychological maltreatment. The first is spurning. These are verbal and nonverbal caregiver acts that reject and degrade a child. And this is what most people think of when they think of like the other terms that are used: psychological abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse. Most people think of this particular form. So examples here are cruel nicknames, saying "I hate you," looking disgusted, mocking a child for being sad, angry, hurt, scared, having normal feelings, and treating one child significantly worse than other siblings. Another form that's become very popular recently, and our research group, and Naomi, who's in the audience here, a family care coordinator for the Fontana Center, or the Foundling, is involved in this. We're looking at, on TikTok and other forms of the internet, this type of parental behavior where parents shame or humiliate a child online, sometimes to get more engagement, and sometimes just to humiliate the child. But the point here is these are all kind of cruel behaviors that are done to the child, and they're very damaging. The next form is terrorizing. And this photo shows something that's routinely done, which is placing a screaming child in a stranger's lap. And I think it's very common. You may have done it yourself. I think people are realizing now that this can really kind of rupture children's trust with parents by being placed in situations where they are totally freaked out. And adults sometimes think it's kind of funny, but it's not funny to the child. So other examples, this is another one that's, I think, common around the world. Parents will threaten to abandon, expel, or disown the child because it's really effective. A lot of very loving parents will do this. Very effective. Kids immediately obey because this is like their worst nightmare. But it leaves children in a state of chronic uncertainty. It also is very damaging if you're in a romantic relationship. When you're always talking about leaving, people are always preparing to be left. So all of those things are very toxic for the relationship. Here are some other examples: allowing a child to witness the parent harming him, herself, or others, creating a climate of fear by telling children they're in danger when they're not, and kind of expecting perfection and rejecting the child for failing to meet the standard. An example might be making a child stand in the corner for an hour because they got an A- rather than an A on a paper, would be one example. Isolating is another subtype. These are caregiver acts that consistently and unreasonably deny the child's opportunities to interact with others. And the picture here shows solitary confinement, which is used in juvenile facilities. And it's psychologically, developmentally, physically damaging, can lead to long-term problems and suicide, and not just to, children, but also to adults. There's an huge English prison complex on Tasmania, if you are going to Australia. And the whole complex is where they developed the idea of psychologically isolating people. And they drove all of these prisoners basically crazy. It's a monument to the horrors of psychological isolation for a social species like us. And I think other examples are probably familiar to you. The second one is making me feel guilty when we go, for my cats, when we go away on vacation, even though we have someone who works, stay in the home. I'm sure they feel like they've been unattended for a week. So these are all examples of isolation. The next type is exploiting and corrupting, caregiver acts that encourage the child to develop inappropriate behaviors and attitudes. It used to be called corrupting the morals of youth or a child. There's a lot of different examples that have to do with promoting antisocial behavior. This is all kind of permitting, encouraging, forcing these types of antisocial behaviors. But it also includes things like infantilizing a child, carrying them around or cutting their food when they're well beyond that, treating them as if they're much younger than they are, but also the extremely damaging form of parentifying a child and making the child take care of the parent's needs. And then just for the hell of it, messing with kids' minds would be other forms of exploiting and corrupting. Emotional unresponsiveness is particularly devastating, birth to 5. The human brain is designed for intense, ongoing social cognitive interaction with a small group of humans. And without that, the brain just doesn't develop appropriately. But examples include being too busy, bored, depressed, high, self-involved to pay attention to or respond to a child, not helping them when they're in distress, not spending regular time with them, making it clear basically that they're not a priority, and making them feel unloved, uninvested in, and therefore very vulnerable and alone. And then the last subtype is medical, mental health, and educational neglect. And other definitional systems often put this more in the neglect category. But this includes not allowing or supporting the child's need for therapy, extra tutoring, and not taking a child to the hospital after a suicide attempt. Okay. So any questions about the definition? This is very quick, but you can watch Psychological Maltreatment 101, and we have a whole host of documents online. Yes. Yeah. 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 Okay, so a lot of that is covered on our website. We did the most recent exhaustive review of the literature is covered in a monograph on psychological maltreatment that's posted there. But we've been reviewing the literature since like 1983, kind of doing updates. We did the original guidelines for APSAC in 1995 and then updated them again in 2017, I think. But back to your point, I think what you're hitting at is a major debate in the field, primarily in the neglect field. Like Howard Dubovitz, who's a child abuse pediatrician and major researcher, he and many other people who focus in on neglect are making the argument that we should focus in on the impact on the child, not whether or not the parent can provide those things or not, because then the blame is all on the parent for not delivering and not on society for providing appropriate supports. Almost all child abuse research literature, not all of it, but a very high percentage focuses on the caregiver being the responsible one, but particularly in the area of poverty and harsh conditions and raising children in refugee camps, and where sometimes the best option might be marrying your daughter off as a 15-year-old to somebody in the local community or something. I mean, sometimes parents are put under just crazy pressures. So that's a debate that's going on in the field, but a lot of people in the neglect community are saying, let's focus in on the child's reality, and then based on that, decide who we're going to hold accountable for the child's needs not being met, because they want to move away from a situation in poverty, or like with a depressed parent who can't get services but is clearly failing their child. Their child will cover the damage of having a depressed, unavailable parent when you're just left all alone. So it's how are we going to decide who we're going to intervene with and take care of. But all the questions you're raising, I think, are critical, and we know very well that people that live on really stressful, poverty conditions do not parent as well. In fact, they parent differently, but they don't parent as well because the stress and the lack of supports. So the major intervention for child abuse by the CDC is to give people income supports, because when you do that, their parenting often it improves measurably when people are not scrambling over every dime and trying to make trade-offs where something's going to fall apart. So that's a really important debate in the field. But the stress of harsh conditions, they make people quarrel. It makes people less likely to stay married or in committed partnerships. It's just, toxic stress undermines people's functioning. So anyway, if you're really interested in that debate, I highly recommend Howard Dubovitz's work. One of his colleagues, Koblensky, just published an article, I think it was in Child Abuse and Neglect. And I'll be happy to send you a copy of those if you want to read in the literature and join into the conversation. Any other comments? Yes. Okay, that's the whole point of that. Stay with me, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Anything else about definitions before I move on? Yeah. We're talking about something that if severe and persistent, as opposed to in the moment. We're not expecting people to, in fact, our view is we want to encourage people to be good parents and learn that there's a huge science of parenting that seems to work universally. But nobody's perfect. I'm not sure children would benefit from perfect parents. Yeah. Severe and persistent, exactly. And that's, I think, why a lot of the states went with a harm standard. And like the military system requires pretty much a harm reaction or something so severe that it's hard to imagine there wouldn't be one. Okay, yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. 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 And I think it's right. And the law is not the most gentle and supportive way of helping people improve their interpersonal relationships. And it's true that some people just check out, are not interested in being a parent. And there's not really much you can do about that if people aren't invested in doing it. So, okay, but we'll move back to the law. We'll use some vignettes where we can use all of your expertise. Okay, let's talk about harm. So, in the US, states treat the different forms of maltreatment quite a bit differently. And we treat sexual abuse. You don't have to prove harm, you just need to prove an act, right? That meets the definition of the law. No harm is required to be proved. Physical abuse, you know, you usually have to provide some tissue damage. But states across the nation define these very similarly. One's investigated by the police, maybe sometimes Child Protective Services, depending on whether it's a gray area or not. And then physical abuse, unless you really beat someone up badly and permanently, is handled by Child Protective Services. Neglect is dealt with for the most part by CPS. It's very variously defined across states. And the most recent national incidence study found it was the least reported by people like you who are mandated reporters and saw it, knew it was there, but they did not call it in. And then PM is variously defined. There are 6 states that have no definition. But some states have very well fledged out definitions, and if you look at their report to the feds in the annual report, it can constitute almost half the cases that they see. So the range goes from 0 to half, and the definitions are variable, although mostly they focus in on mental cruelty or emotional harm. Okay, the research does not support this at all, because PM is as harmful, in some cases more harmful than the other forms of child maltreatment. And at this point in time, there's a very large, high quality, very international literature on this. The data are not, to go back to the discussion within, since I think a lot of you are graduate students or faculty, so the child abuse in the literature no longer has a weird problem, right? It's the samples that come in now are from all over the world, and the scholars are from all over the world. Okay, 6 broad categories of harm. So the first and probably the strongest data is for psychological abuse and neglect, all forms of psychological maltreatment being very closely tied to depression, suicidality, and non-suicidal self-injury. The literature is so strong here. I mean, the first strong signal was in the original ACEs study, where they found that the ACE that was most related to depression immediately and over the lifespan was emotional abuse. But the evidence is so strong, and it comes from all different types and qualities of study, that most of the research in this area is exactly what's going on that's causing this. But, you know, if you are living in a situation where parents are saying things to you or treating you in ways that make you feel degraded, unloved, unworthwhile, not meeting standards, etc., this leads to low self-esteem, shame, hopelessness, impaired, untrusting interpersonal relationships, which are all the types of things you see in people that are suicidal and not wanting to live and likely to give up hope, etc. Second main type is social anxiety disorder and rejection sensitivity. There isn't as much research on this, but there's actually quite a few studies now, and what they show is that individuals who meet criteria for social anxiety disorder report high levels of parental psychological abuse and neglect, but not child sexual abuse, physical abuse, or physical neglect. And again, it gets back to when you have a parent swearing at you, threatening to hit or abandon you, telling you you're worthless, or basically taking no interest in you, this this has an impact on what you expect for other people in relationships, and sets up a situation where you're expecting to be judged and put down and criticized, or feeling like you don't want to make a bid for an attention for someone else because they're likely to reject you because you're uninteresting, unworthwhile, etc. Type 3 is conduct disorders. A lot, but not all of the literature links this with the combo of physical and psychological abuse. And this leading to getting in trouble with the law. Psychological abuse alone is related to higher levels of abuse in romantic relationships. And of course, if the battering or if kids are exposed to watching parents in violent relationships, and if they've also been physically abused, that can be a component of the violence in the romantic relationship as well. Substance abuse, sexually risky behavior, other forms of perpetuating aggression are all related to this combo. So this one, I think, surprises people. We've known for a long time in the child abuse literature that kids are more likely to have like soft signs of craziness. They hear voices, people saying awful things about them, hearing their name, being kind of confused about what's real and not real. But this is a component of not in every case we see, but a dramatically increased likelihood of these type of thinking problems. And when you look at all the different forms of abuse and neglect together, the form that's most common in the backgrounds of kids that develop these type of thought disorders are psychological abuse. So you're kind of getting the harsh, critical voice. You may have parents that messed with your mind. And a lot of people think these reactions are part of the trauma experience. But it's surprisingly common, not as much as the other forms. But if you take a look at the literature on psychosis and dissociation, you see that strong relationship. So low cognitive functioning, there's a ton of longitudinal studies. Most of these were conducted in the rich world, so the Anglophone rich world. But what they show is that having psychologically neglectful parenting, even if it's providing good care. So to give you an example of this research, there's the Minnesota longitudinal study of risk and adaptation, where high-risk families were picked up just prior to the birth of their first child. And now they're doing grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But one of their early discoveries was that kids who had mothers, and they did a lot of visits to the home and intensive observation, they had mothers who often kept these kids like clean and fed, although often propped up with a bottle to be fed, but almost no interaction, ignoring the kid, leaving the kid alone for long periods of time. These kids were normal on individual developmental assessments at 12 months. They were well below average at 18 months. And we have then these many studies around the world. I'll give you one most recent example. One of my favorites is a 1958 British birth cohort study of 9,000. And they found that psychological and physical neglect in childhood significantly predicted low cognitive functioning, low reading, low math, low IQ in childhood, poor educational qualifications, i.e. not getting through high school, not going very far in schooling at age 40, and at age 50, low processing speed and working memory scores. And they controlled for a whole host of factors that would have interfered with people's ability to think. And the biggest factor was neglect. And that's been repeated in so many studies, that this absence of cognitive, social, emotional stimulation is really devastating for children. So back to your point of the baby, you may have a depressed mother. You don't want to label her as a child abuser, but her child is not getting what they need to develop normally. So there's better ways to intervene and decide how to call that, but that's a crisis situation. Okay, and then the last one is physical health problems. This is a really growing area. My inbox is now flooded with studies on psychological maltreatment and different parts of the brain not working right. But just to give you some examples here, one of our favorites is from the Japan environmental study that's going on right now with 80,000 Japanese moms and babies and the rest of the family. They're trying to look at pre and para and post-pregnancy factors and the environment that influence child development in Japan. So they found that they controlled for like 16 things that could interfere with hearing. And they found that the most important factor was verbal abuse of the mother by her partner during pregnancy. And they're like, how could this be? Because having a hearing problem meant in your first week of life, you failed 2 screenings. So then they sent you for a hearing referral. That's bad. Their hypothesis is that there may be something about hearing a loud, non-maternal voice experienced in conjunction with the mother's rapid heart rate that creates an environment that's uncomfortable for the fetus and may negatively affect auditory functioning. So it's a really interesting study. We've known for a long time that psychological abuse is quite related to asthma. We could go into the mechanics of that, but we don't have time. But the reduction in height from psychological and physical abuse is a new one that I hadn't seen before. But again, I think it fits in with the larger literature, and quite a few of you may be graduate students or faculty, and you know that child maltreatment accelerates aging and really takes a toll on the body through a variety of different factors. So that's probably is fitting in with this one. Okay, I'll take one question before I move on because I've got other material I have to get to, but we have a question on harm? No? Okay, yeah. Self-craziness? Ah, okay. No, that's not a term in the literature. That's like my term. Some of the early reports, and these are probably back in the 80s and the early 90s, of kids showing kind of soft psychosis signs had to do with hearing voices when no one else could hear them. And a lot of the voices were like hearing their name being called, like in an angry way, or hearing voices that they maybe couldn't discriminate from somebody being present or not, but maybe it was like their father or their mother or their stepfather's voice, like saying, really, you're just a loser, you're never gonna make anything of yourself, kind of being a little bit disoriented at times. These were like early clinical reports. And now there's much larger literature on, I guess there's a continuum of, I'm not an expert on psychosis, but there's a continuum in the sense of milder signs, and then you're already into more full-blown child schizophrenia. If we needed more information on this, Rosalind would step in here as a child psychiatrist. But there's variations of being in touch with reality. If you look at data, from the Rorschach, which is kind of a measure of how people think in real time, there's a lot of people walking around with thinking problems. Kids who have conduct disorder diagnoses, they have a lot of just basic kind of thinking problems. You probably know a lot of people who have kind of funny ideas about how things are, who function fine, but have really kind of funny ideas about how the world works. That's what I mean. Yeah, okay, so craziness is the term you objected to, not the soft. Yeah, okay. Point well taken. Anything else? Moving on. Okay, well, the points I wanted to make here is that there's a huge literature. We've got 7 main domains: psychological maltreatment's an adverse childhood experience, and it's not treated with the respect in policy and practice that it deserves. Okay, so now you get to apply your expertise, okay? So we briefly reviewed the APSAC definition, the New York laws. We have some experts here on the New York law, but I would like you to think about these vignettes. I'm going to present 5 vignettes, and I want you, we'll probably do some hand raising here to see what you think of them. So I'm going to put them up, and I want you to raise your hand for adequate parenting, poor parenting, but not PM, reason to suspect PM, or definite PM, okay? And then we'll talk about them in a little bit more depth about how the state would handle them. Okay, here's Tito. So, mother kept him out of school 1 to 2 days a week because she was lonely, wanted company while she drank. He would laugh at her jokes, get her a cold beer. And over time, she encouraged him to drink beer with her because she was kind of lonely. We'll skip adequate parenting. How many people think poor parenting but not PM? Okay, reason to suspect. Okay, and definite. Okay, all right. I mean, we have some educational neglect here. We definitely have some corrupting the morals and the physicality of the child. There's maybe he probably has not developed DT yet, but I think most judges, child court judges, would think that impairment would be moving along down the line kind of quickly. Okay, here's Rita. Active baby. At 14 months, her mother still kept her strapped in a portable car seat most of the day. Most days, because she would get underfoot when she was loose. Okay, adequate parenting. Poor parenting, but not PM. Okay, reason to suspect. All right, and definite. Okay, so we've got a range of the poor parenting, but not PM, all the way to definite. So we'll come back. We'll cycle back to this one. On this one, what would you need here to go with definite PM? Would you need cognitive motor impairments from not moving around? What would you need for those of you who are thinking poor parenting but not? Nobody? Yes, in the back. Yeah. Okay, so there might be a tray table with the baby. She might be present. All of those things would be important. Okay. Any other comments? All right. Sonny. These are all real cases. Dad was angry that Sonny Jr. was getting mouthy, coming in late at night, getting into fights at school. Dad slit the throat of Ruby, Sonny Jr.'s cat, threw her corpse on his bed with a note reading, "This is what happens when boys get out of line." Okay, we're gonna skip adequate parenting. We're gonna skip poor parenting, but not PM. How many think reason to suspect? Okay, so everybody thinks this is definite. All right. Well, I think in New York, even you could get somebody just on animal cruelty, right? I mean, I'm not an expert on the animal cruelty law, but so this certainly seems like terrorizing at its best, right? This is almost like a death threat. Yeah. Okay, this is one. Anybody here work in a CAC? No CAC people. Okay. So Pari, after her close friend disclosed that she and Pari, both 10, had been sexually abused by Pari's 19-year-old brother, CPS ordered mom to bring her into the CAC. In front of Pari's mom started the conversation by deriding the girlfriend as a slut and a disgusting liar who just wanted attention and would do anything to get it. "My son would never do that," she insisted emphatically. And of course, Pari refused to speak to the forensic interviewer. All right, what do you think here? Adequate? No. How about poor parenting but not PM? Reason to suspect? Okay. And definite. All right, we're split between those two. What would you need here to move this one way or the other? Are you thinking the mother was just upset in the moment? You know, I mean, this is having your son as a convicted sex offender is like very bad for his prospects in life. So what were you going to say? Okay, so you would be concerned about maybe she was just flipping out. Okay, And this is like, it's hard to imagine a more stressful situation for a parent. On one hand, your kid may be getting, raped by your older brother and the neighborhood girl too. On the other hand, if your child could be going to jail. So I think people can identify with how hurtful it is to the girl if this becomes persistent and it's like the mother's denying, preventing this from being investigated, and that leaves the daughter, if they determine this to be the case, unprotected by a sex offender in the parent's home, okay? But on the other hand, this son deserves a fair and independent investigation because, his future is dramatically foreclosed should the allegation be substantiated. Okay. So what forms of maltreatment would you see as this one? Definitely. Yeah, because by implication, you're a slut, right? And a disgusting liar if you agree with the girlfriend. But yeah, totally unavailable to the daughter and whatever. Nothing about, honey, what happened? Tell me, we want to know what's going on. We want to be supportive. Yeah, the girl, if persistent, could get the impression that her parents might not be standing up for her. Lena, okay, age 5. She's in your kindergarten class. We have any teachers here? No teachers. Okay. She recently stopped playing with the other children. You observed her interacting the death of a baby doll, saying everything would be fine if you were never born in the doll corner. Her mother confided that her marriage is failing and she blames Lena and the demands of parenting on the breakup. And you have observed her tell Lena at pickup drop-off that if she had not caused so much trouble, her parents would be happy. She should have been aborted. Okay. All right, so are we going with reason to suspect or definite here? Definite, yeah. Okay, you have the harm here, right? You have suicidal talk, back to the connection. You have clearly observed behavior, closely tied to the harm effects of a child engaging in like suicidal talking play. Preschoolers do kill themselves. Almost all of the ones who do have been maltreated. Yeah, so it's not a good situation. What forms do you see here? Spurning. Okay, a particularly gross form. Just quickly going out under New York law, let's just go back. So Tito would be screened in for investigation, likely substantiated, or just for investigation, or is there any chance that it wouldn't have been screened in? Our experts here. Nobody's working for Child Protective Services. Yeah. Okay, not for psychological abuse. Yeah. Just for ed neglect. Okay. That's very concrete, right? You don't have it. No one has to come in and offer an opinion. Okay. What about this one, Rita? Would this get screened in at all? Probably not. Okay. What about Sunny? This would be screened in and substantiated. All right. Pari? Investigated? Okay. And Lena? Screened in and substantiated. Okay. Great. So the point here is that you first need to know what psychological maltreatment is so that you can do something about it. We encourage you to use the research and professional definitions online. The broadest definition is the APSAC definition that you can find on the Psychological Maltreatment Alliance website. It's even much more detailed that I gave you. That gives you an idea of what the research literature consistently across many studies shows is harmful to children. Those are caregiver behaviors, if severe, persistent, are harmful to children. So then you need to think about when you observe poor parenting in your work, upfront and close, and maybe in your professional responsibility to deal with it, you then need to think about what actions you should take. First, does it meet a state definition of maltreatment? And if it does, then you need to report it. If you suspect it, if it seems consistent with the definition, you have clear reason to suspect, you need to report it. But whether it meets definition or not, we're making the argument that we should all be upstanders for children and use the opportunities we have to intervene. Now, maybe it's an intervention where people are screened in for educational neglect, you refer for other services. But sometimes in all of our lives, in many situations, professional and otherwise, we run into cases where clearly a child is not being treated well. What can we do? So what I'd like to talk about now, and we have a subsequent session that Amy and Rosalind are doing later this afternoon that builds much further on this topic, is how do you become an effective upstander? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a huge topic. Amy, do you know of any study? I've seen a lot of discussion about parents just being checked out um, because they're on the phone all the time. And I must say, going on vacations, I I have, I'm older now, so I travel, which is what you do in my age group. Anyway, I'll see families and they just, nobody talks through a whole 2-hour dinner. Food comes, there's a discussion with the waiter. Every single person has an electronic device. There is zero conversation going on. So I think it's a good area of research, but yeah. And you hear, there's also, I think I've seen 1 or 2 studies of like romantic partnerships and the effect of people being on the phones in romantic partnerships. It's not an area where I'm doing research, so I didn't download those. I'm just skimming the abstracts. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to just be completely checked out. I see it also, I read, these are crazy things that pop up too, like the Naval Academy. This was pre-COVID, offering social skills courses to they have a term, cadets. Isn't that what they call the Naval Academy people? They call them cadets, correct? Okay. So that the cadets, they have a lot of cadets now who do not know how to relate to other people. Now, kind of their inference was because of people communicating through screens and less involvement in going to church or synagogue groups or Boy Scouts or whatever, that kids were not getting that type of, but even pre-COVID, this was an issue where they had to provide extra curriculum to teach people how to relate to one another. So, I mean, the most obvious culprit is all the screen use that we engage in, so. Okay, so what we're pitching here is that we all need to know how to not walk away if we recognize a problem. There's times when it doesn't make sense. I mean, some of you may be investigating, and unless something gets really severe, you need to know how the parent's typically behaving if that's part of your job in doing an evaluation for a court or something. And sometimes timing is such that you're better off pulling a parent aside at another time. But we're basically arguing here that it's important to not walk away, but to step up and intervene, but not in a way that degrades, punishes, takes a superior view, i.e., don't psychologically maltreat the caregiver when you're stepping in. All about parallel process, right? Treat the parent the way you'd like them to treat the child, the way you'd like to be treated. So, an upstander recognizes a need in stressful, problematic human interactions, thinks about the best way to intervene, and chooses to engage in a respectful and sensitive manner. So, one of my guiding lights from, I don't know, a long time ago, I was at Walmart and the cashier over had a screaming little 2.5-year-old, 3-year-old, and a frustrated mother who was making very critical comments to her child who was upset. And without missing a beat, I don't think they were this was a long time ago, so she was, using the keypad rather than scanning. She just started saying to the kid and kind of to the mom in the background, it's a long day of shopping, people get really tired and frustrated, and talking to the little boy, I bet you're looking forward to going home and just, stopping all this time around. And I'm sure your mom's hoping for the same thing too, but it's almost over. We're almost checked out. Things are going to get better. And the temperature went way down just really quickly. And the mom made a comment to the cashier, yeah, I just don't like shopping with him, but particularly late in the day. We were running late, and this is, and it's just embarrassing when he gets all upset like this, etc. So it was just a tiny little intervention, but this woman had it nailed. And that's what we're talking about here in terms of upstanding behavior. She communicated understanding, empathy, and caring. She focused on the needs of both parties. She emphasized assets and strengths, waiting just a little bit longer, being patient, it's almost over, kind of self-talk to calm down, de-escalated, and provided an encouraging perspective. And also to the mom of modeling a way to intervene, like just, it's almost over. I know you're tired, honey. I'm tired too. It's been way too long. I won't do this again. We'll just, we'll try to not have such long days, whatever. So this is the type of thing that we are talking about. And some of it you may know from your other work. I mean, preparing bystanders is important for stopping, dating violence on campus and, a whole host of other things. So probably the most useful skill of all in being an intervener is to find a way to start soft. Because if you start hard, you are doomed to failure. So, and you can see why. A lot of people's interventions for a crying child, people go up to somebody in the grocery store and make a comment, can't you even control your child? Or you're being abusive, in some sort of really critical way, which you can imagine, I'm assuming it's kind of young looking crowd, but some of you are old enough to have children. And I'm sure you've all been there if you have a child who is having a hard time in a long day in the grocery store and it's going on too long, and maybe you made the mistake of going down the wrong aisle and didn't get them what they wanted in a cart. So this is like a common experience, but it sure doesn't help when other people are judging you. So making critical comments are not helpful. They make people feel worse. They make people less regulated than they're even more dysregulated than they were. And they make them feel very angry at the person that came and made the situation even worse. So, avoid harsh startups in all delicate conversations. So we'll give you some practice. All right, stop doing that. It won't work. You're just like your father. Suggestions for rephrasing that. You can just shout them out. What's it say? Saying what? Maybe you can try something different. Okay, that's certainly not putting somebody down. Anything else? Okay, so you're checking in with emotion. Huh? With something else. Okay, so you can distract them, You could notice that they're upset. You could make a suggestion for doing something else, maybe even suggest what that is. Okay, intimate partner. So uh, you say to your partner, you just want to work all the time and never be home with us. Yeah, how would you rewrite this? This is not a good conversation opener. I'm proposing that if you are feeling, maybe you just had a new baby and maybe your spouse has decided to work extra hours because you need the money, babies are expensive, and maybe you're not currently working or whatever, but you're feeling neglected. Okay, so you say this. Is there a way to make the same point without putting the partner down? Okay, we miss you with your work and don't drop the issue. You're trying to get more time. So we miss you. I would like it if you were home more. Okay, yeah. Okay, all right. And that's a kind of a compliment, right? I miss having you around. Yes, Amy, keep moving. Okay, and the last one? You're not holding your child right. You're making her cry. Can I show you something that might work? Okay, that's a great lead in, especially if you can actually say that. Okay. So these were great. You guys came up with exactly what we thought of, but these open up the possibilities. If you start harsh, you don't get what you want, whatever your goal is. And so it's really top skill is learn how to start soft and open up possibilities rather than closing them down from the get-go. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we in our remaining time together, is I'm going to give you some cases. Do you want to talk these over? You know, we really don't have groups here, but would you like to talk them over in a group or just read them and we'll discuss them as a group? Would that be easier? Okay. All right. So this is Kathy and her mom. It's kind of like the situation I alluded to before. Your next door neighbor, Ruth. What happened? Help tech people. Oh, it's still up there? Okay. All right. My screen went dead. Okay. All right. I can't read it to you. Can you read it yourselves? Everybody has a reading level here. All right, good. Is the tech guy here? Oh, no. Tech person, what happened? My screen went dead. Okay. All right. Yeah, okay. Now you don't have it. Okay, here we go. Oh, so 10-month-old Kathy, Ruth is your friend. She's not acting like herself. Baby's not looking good. Okay. So, you need another minute to read it? Yeah, okay. Okay? All right. So, what might you say or do to help? Yeah. Okay. Just as a, got it. See what she has to say. Okay? Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay. So in the room, just going to get the baby and inter. Okay. Can I hold Kathy? Oh, what a sweetheart she is. It's a cute little outfit, getting a conversation going. Yes. Okay. You might hold off on that one for the opening, but I think that's something that could come into the conversation after you've gotten things going. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. This is a four-alarm fire. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Right. All of those things would help. Yes. Yeah. So you're addressing head on, but in a subtle way. Are we in a postpartum depression sort of state here? Which even if you started taking the baby, all of those things would help. But if she is clinically depressed and really stuck and in trouble, and if the baby's moving into failure to thrive, a lot of extra, all those things, extra babysitting at an extra level, interacting with the baby, all of those things are really good things to do, but you may be well beyond the crisis point there. Those would be good things to do, I think, with somebody. Maybe not quite. This is really looking pretty severe, but all of those things are really helpful and likely to draw people back in. Sometimes, if you have a neighbor who seems depressed or said they've been down, you're maybe not seeing signs of failure to thrive, but you're a little concerned. Those regular visits, maybe taking the baby out and giving mom the break, just spending time, whatever seems to help with the mood, maybe speaking to the husband, etc. But you had a comment back there. Yeah, that's you. Yeah. 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 Because it's not that uncommon an experience to struggle with depression after childbirth. Yes. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah, you're the first ones. Yeah. Right. They knew it all the time, and maybe they said something to the police and they ignored them or whatever. But I think I agree with both of you. I like all of the statements. There's some ideas other people have put up, and these are a lot of the things you have made. I think these are really good things. if you don't have a child on the verge of like failure to thrive and a very clearly clinically depressed mother, and I think in those situations, I think I would move in, at least certainly professionally, but as a psychologist with a next door neighbor, and this is my, I would say, listen, I'm just really concerned at what I'm seeing. You're not yourself. I'm seeing this, this, and this. It really makes me worried about your mental health, that you're depressed. It's really common after the birth of a child and your first child or whatever. And I'm just worried about it. And when I look at the baby, and I know how much you were looking forward to having her and excited you were, but she's facing the wall. She doesn't look like she's thriving, even though, you're getting her dressed and you're changing her. She's not doing well. I think we really have a crisis here. I think we need, to we need to get you some mental health support, and we need to do something to get your baby. Your baby is not doing well, and we need to go to the we need to work out a plan. Because this is a crisis situation. As I said, I can't stress enough. I think most people are totally unaware of how birth to 5 emotional neglect, unless you're getting beat the hell up, the worst thing that can happen to you is to not have social emotional interaction by regular caregivers who care about you. It's just devastating. This is why children who are fed well in orphanages, they don't do well because they're isolated and they don't have this intense social emotional interaction and connection that we are hardwired to need to develop, for our brains to develop normally. So this is a real tragic situation, and think of her, how bad her life could be without an intervention to prevent a harm. And she's probably well aware of the fact that her baby doesn't look good and that this is not going to be news to her that she's in trouble. It's not going to be news to her that her baby's not doing well. Okay, we'll do 2 more. Okay, here's another neighbor. So Coach Garcia, I don't know how many of you are sports parents, but maybe you were, the younger ones, maybe you were in sporting teams. You're walking to the parking lot with Coach right after the team lost a game. Your son's been coached by Coach for 2 years, and you've observed some trends that are making you concerned. Coach used to be supportive and good at helping players find their strengths, build on them, apply them. He was encouraging. But this year, he focuses almost entirely on their weaknesses. That was a terrible kick, the worst I've seen. Isn't there anything you can do right? You're the reason we lost that game, so maybe you should call in sick next time. So your son and his teammates are going more afraid. They don't want to get negative attention from the coach. So instead of putting everything they have into the game, leaving it all on the field, they're trying to not be criticized by him. Okay. Mel, you were an athlete. I don't know if this happened to you, but you were always encouraged. Okay. So what do you think? These kids are, this is Stuart Hart's example. So I'm thinking these kids are like in soccer. Let's say they're 9 and 10. Okay? So what are you thinking here? Yeah. Yeah. It's a delicate situation. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, and so what you're having now is you're having athletes who become more eminent, standing up for themselves. And first it was sexual abuse, and now they're fighting psychological abuse. Yes. What are we going to do to turn things around with Coach Garcia? Yeah. Okay. 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 You're sounding very empathetic. I would be willing to listen to you. And I go, you're right about that. Yeah. Yeah, it's not normal for this has been a change. So you're opening a conversation, you're using your coach experience to be, and you know how much pressure there is in the community. It sounds like a lot of kids have been with you for a while. Maybe you were good at recruiting a lot of good kids and you're losing. And so you're opening the conversation very empathetically. Yes. Yeah. Uh huh. Okay. 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 So if you were like the owner of the Nets, who obviously had a conversation like that with, yeah, although not everybody thinks he was the one who should be fired. But anyway, there's a lot of, you never know. But you're right, he's on the line. So you go into what's going on. Yes. Okay. You talk to the kids and get a sense of if is this is just your and then you might even be able to use that information. Yeah. Yeah. What was the last thing you said? Okay. So that would be another way of going in. We have one more after this, so I'm going to move on. But I think this is a great, I like a lot of your examples. Um, this is when I've used this with a few other groups, and this is the most common response is getting a conversation going. And then I think these other things could come. You seem pretty discouraged this season. I used to see you smile more. That's opening up a conversation, and then it might get into why are things are not going so well, and that might include, I heard overheard some of the kids saying blah blah. I'm just wondering. You used to use these techniques, and I'm wondering if the way you've modified your style is just not as working as well. All of those things could come into play. Yes, you were just moving your hand. I thought you were raising your hand, so no. Okay. But I think you can see this as a very soft startup, but it would allow you going into a game analysis. It would allow you into talking about your observations of the kids and any experiences they were having. And it opens up a chance to have empathetic coach to coach conversations that the guy might say, my marriage is falling apart. He might say, I'm worried about losing my job. He might say, we did so well last year, and then we started slowly, and I felt I must need to change my tech. Who knows what he's going to say? But it's opening up a conversation where other stuff can come up. Okay, final one, and this may relate more to child welfare. So you're an in-home case manager whose role is to support compliance with the recommendation of the diabetic educator and the doctor. So dad has a history of poor compliance, which is why you're on the scene. And he's telling 9-year-old Damien disparaging things like, if he isn't going to have a more active role in diabetic management, swear, 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 I'll leave that out. If he dies, that's on him. If he loses a leg, that's on him. That's not my problem. I don't care. Dad makes eye contact with Damien, saying, if he wants to continue this way, I hope he dies and I hope he is hurt because I don't know how else to get it through his head. Okay? What might you say or do to help? Okay. So would you do that in front of the kid? Would you pull him aside? You'd pull him to the side. Okay? Great. Yeah. 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 I like that. Think back to how you were at 9. Would you have been able to do this all by yourself? Because you almost need like a graduate course in nutrition to manage diabetes. I mean, it's like, whoa. Who hasn't talked before? You haven't said anything. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I like all those comments because you're going with the fact that he's obviously concerned about his son, right? And it is pretty overwhelming. He's obviously feeling overwhelmed by it, like he can't do it himself, so he like wants to kind of push it off on his son. But it is kind of overwhelming, and I like you're drawing in having these people in the home like monitoring how well he's doing it. Nobody really likes that. So that's another issue that's going on. We had another hand up over here. Yes. Yeah. Right. So back to what can a 9-year-old actually do and so forth. I think those are things are good. What about mitigating the impact on Damien? We haven't heard his voice here, but having your father say, I hope you die. I hope you, whatever. What are you going to do about that? I like everything you're doing with dad. What are you going to do about addressing how he might feel having heard that? I mean, yeah. Okay. Right. And that's a delicate thing because you want to intervene in a way that doesn't put dad down. But at the same time, I think it's it's always a decision about how to address things, but leaving that alone, that kind of language is so harsh. I hope you die. That I think for Damien's sake, it needs to be, he needs to be included in the conversation to some extent. Yes, Naomi. Can you talk a little louder? Okay, recommend for services. Yeah. Okay, definitely. Yes. Yeah. Well, there's ways of, I guess, by a Janet, if it's softly. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, it is. But you're right. I think this is the person whose case this was. This was a case. You're going to hear more about the research study this afternoon. But this was a mandated reporter who was in a study that we did. This is how she handled it. Okay, let's take a break. I know that you're saying these things out of frustration. Surely that's not what you mean. And then bringing him to the side. But she's saying that kind of in front of the kid. You're saying these things, and I think you're right. It needs to be, and then a long talk about how harmful this is. But I agree with you. I think if somebody's saying stuff like this and not complying, I'm getting really worried about safety issues here. So I think it may be another level, but I think a nice way to intervene is say, let's take a break, like you're trying to de-escalate. You're saying things out of frustration. That's definitely the case, right? So you're not putting him down. It's like anybody could be frustrated. I like the comment, you have people here in your home supervising things, but this is a really serious situation. You're recognizing that and then having a private conversation about how this is really hurtful. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No. You're just going to destroy the relationship. That doesn't mean you don't confront people. Like back to the situation with Kathy, this is a crisis. And in that situation, I think you need to go in and say, this is a crisis. You're not doing okay. Your baby's not doing okay. We have to get help. And making that really kind of non-negotiable in that sort of way. But that is a loving way. I mean, think of your own situation where you weren't thinking straight, right? We've all had situations where we weren't thinking straight. Maybe we're sick and we should go to the hospital, maybe, who knows? But we all are in situations where somebody needs to step up, but always in a respectful way. So that's the soft part, is the opening up to conversation and not putting down. The harsh part, the harsh startup, is where you put down, you minimize, you walk away, you don't care, and then you almost never get the outcome you want. So the soft isn't being soft on the parent or the child. The soft is talking in a way you'd like to be talked to if you were in a situation that was problematic. So on that note, since we're out of time, I have one last slide. Bottom line is, child psychological maltreatment is really harmful, needs to be addressed when you see it. It's covered in New York state law, not very well, but reporting is one way to address it. Another way is to be an upstander. And we have another workshop this afternoon that Amy Baker and Rosalind Murov are doing, which goes more into additional ways to address situations. Thank you for your time and attention. And here's Mel Schneiderman.
Thank you, Marla. Marla is one of the pioneers in child maltreatment, psychological maltreatment. So thank you very much. Wonderful, as usual.